Over 1.4 billion people call the Republic of India home. The world's most populous country is a melting pot of languages, religions, and cultures. Its landscapes stretch from arid desert to steaming jungle, from soaring temples to red brick forts. This unprecedented variety of people and places makes India the powerhouse it is today. But as history shows, people and places are hardly enduring. They need to be fought for. Modern India is a nation forged in conflict. After over a century of British rule, the Indian subcontinent was controversially partitioned, leading to the Indo-Pakistani War of 1947 to 1948. The early Indian military, still largely led by British officers, seized the majority of the disputed region of Kashmir in the mountainous north, and would consolidate its control over other areas in the subsequent years, though not without leaving India with a flurry of border disputes that reverberate into the present. Despite its precarious security situation, the Indian military was initially an underfunded force that relied on a strategy of defense in depth. Unfortunately, this doctrine restricted the ability of the armed forces to respond to limited incursions, such as the case in India's 1962 conflict with China. Renewed conflict with Pakistan provided India an opportunity to refine its military doctrine, leading to a gradual mechanization of the army and a focus on overwhelming offensives. The modern geopolitical and strategic situation of India exists in the shadow of its early conflicts. Namely, the country possesses numerous contested borders with neighboring China and Pakistan. As a result of Pakistan's close relationship with China, India has long pursued a counterbalancing relationship with Russia. However, as the war in Ukraine calls Russia's reliability into question, India has begun to pursue closer defense relationships with Western countries like the United States and France. The Indian military's strategic doctrine closely reflects its geopolitical situation. Overwhelmingly geared toward countering the threats posed by Pakistan and China, the Indian military is heavily concentrated in the country's north and west. While the Indian military has historically been organized to deliver devastating offensives deep into the territory of its rivals, this blunt strategy has proved too rigid to respond to the asymmetric warfare of the 21st century. As a response to this changing landscape, India has adopted what it calls a cold start doctrine. Under this new strategy, the Indian military has been reorganized into smaller, more flexible battle groups that aim to mobilize quickly and deliver swift conventional strikes against Pakistan in particular. In the event of war, India hopes to use its new combat forces to seize limited chunks of Pakistani territory before the international community can intervene. This conquered territory could then be used as a bargaining chip in subsequent negotiations. The Indian Armed Forces are organized into three primary service branches: the Army, Air Force, and Navy. Exemplifying the country's focus on land-based territorial defense, the Indian Army is by far the largest branch of the armed forces, with over 1.2 million active personnel, more than a million greater than the Air Force and Navy combined, and the largest land force in the world. Securing and safeguarding its vast borders against formidable neighbors like China and Pakistan is a top priority for India's modern military. Doctrinally, the Indian Army has always been fixated on the possibility of a two-front war against China and Pakistan. The rough terrain of the Chinese-Indian border and the technological superiority of the Chinese military make a ground conflict with India's northern neighbor exceptionally unappealing. For this reason, the Army's 2018 land warfare doctrine prioritizes de-escalation and deterrence with China, while advocating for a more provocative approach to Pakistan. To enable rapid advances against its enemies, the Indian Army has steadily focused on mechanizing its massive force, a priority reflected in its organization. Indian Army units are divided into two types of formations: Strike Corps and Holding Corps. Strike Corps prioritize mechanized warfare and feature a greater portion of India's tank force of over 3,700 vehicles. Holding Corps, on the other hand, are more static contingents, well suited to defense. In the event of a war, these Holding Corps would be expected to pin down opposing forces, while the more maneuverable Strike Corps roll deep into enemy territory. In recent years, the equipment of the Indian Army has undergone significant modernization and increased reliance on domestic manufacturing, but still remains behind many other world powers in these respects. Many armored vehicles used by the Indian Army, like the T-72, T-90, or BMP-2, are Russian or Soviet in origin, though a large portion of these are manufactured locally in India. Recently, the Indian Army has begun incorporating a greater variety of Indian equipment, such as the Arjun tank, into their arsenal. This is a trend that the Indian government is hoping to encourage. While the Indian Army has geared up for an armored conflict, much of the branch's recent experience has been low-grade counterinsurgency fighting in the disputed region of Kashmir. To fight this conflict, the Indian Army relies on a light infantry force known as the Rashtriya Rifles, which is a designated counterinsurgency group focused on internal security. While smaller in scope, this guerrilla war has been costly. Since 1989, the Indian Army has suffered more casualties combating insurgents than it has in any of its high-intensity military conflicts. Despite its current commitment to counterinsurgency, India has the capacity to massively escalate any conflict with its stockpile of approximately 150 to 200 nuclear weapons. Possessing the ability to deploy nuclear devices from land, sea, or air-based platforms, India is the only country outside of the UN Security Council confirmed to possess a nuclear triad. Though India has committed to not be the first member of a conflict to use nuclear weapons, India's nuclear-armed rival, Pakistan, has not agreed to any such limitation. This volatile combination has deeply influenced the strategy of the Indian military, as evidenced by the limited offensives favored in India's Cold Start doctrine. The Indian military is skewed heavily toward land warfare, but that is not to say that it lacks assets elsewhere. In fact, the Indian Air Force is the fourth largest in the entire world, with 730 combat-capable aircraft. Historically, concentrated primarily against Pakistan, the Indian Air Force has undergone significant doctrinal shifts in recent years, as India seeks to transition the service from an army support role to an independent tool of power projection. Complicating the expanded mission of the Indian Air Force is its eclectic and sometimes outdated collection of airframes. Attempts to produce modern Indian-designed combat aircraft have met with much delay and spiraling costs. As a result, the majority of the Air Force's fleet consists of Russian aircraft such as the Su-30 and MiG-29. The Indian Air Force has also procured a number of aircraft from France, most notably the advanced Dassault Rafale. Despite its wide variety of aircraft in service, the Indian Air Force remains significantly under strength, with only 31 squadrons operational out of a target of 42. Smaller still is the Indian Navy. Decades of preparation for land-based conflicts with Pakistan, as well as the heavy fixation on the mountainous northern border, have left the Navy relatively neglected. However, with China making increasingly aggressive moves into the Indian Ocean, India has begun to restructure its navy into a force capable of countering its rival. India's most potent maritime assets are its 2 aircraft carriers, which can carry a combined total of 60 aircraft. In the future, India envisions its navy possessing 3 carrier battle groups, But the acquisition and construction of these vessels has been marred by delays and cost overruns. Some in the Indian Navy have even suggested abandoning plans for carriers altogether and redirecting funding to smaller drone ships and hypersonic missiles. While the Indian Navy does face significant challenges, it is still a powerful force that is only growing in confidence. In addition to its costly carriers, the Indian Navy fields 27 large surface warships and 18 submarines, including 2 nuclear-powered strategic submarines. Complementing this formidable fleet are 160 coastal and patrol craft, some of which can be armed with small missiles. Nevertheless, India's fleet remains significantly smaller and less capable than China's, a fact that India has sought to rectify through renewed shipbuilding efforts and military cooperation with the United States. The coming years will likely see significant modernization to the equipment of the entire Indian military. Ideally, much of this new equipment will come from Indian defense firms, decreasing the country's current reliance on foreign suppliers such as Russia. It remains to be seen if Indian industry is up to this daunting task, but the rapid rise of Indian economic power gives reason for some optimism. As India attempts to increase its power projection capabilities, upgrades to the Air Force and Navy will be especially crucial. In terms of doctrine, India will have to navigate the fraught possibility of fighting a conventional war with its nuclear-armed rivals of Pakistan and China. As China continues to flex its muscles in the Indian Ocean, it will be especially critical for India to find effective strategies to contain this growing threat. Harboring complementary goals, Western nations, such as the United States, will likely seek to collaborate more closely with the rising power of India. Since its independence over 75 years ago, the Indian armed forces have accomplished much. They have successfully defended the country in a number of conflicts, served countless humanitarian roles, and have never threatened the political process of the world's largest democracy. That's a legacy worth fighting for.